Dear participants, the fifth Green Crescent International Congress of Technology Addiction proceeds with the second session. I would like to make the following announcement for the participant who just joined. For English or Turkish interpreting, there is a button at the bottom of the screen. For English, please click on English. For Turkish, please click on Korean. Thank you. The chairperson of this session will be Professor Vedat Işıkhan, member of the Crescent Scientific Committee, co-initial member of the Social Policies, co-initial of the Presidency of the Republic of Turkey, and faculty member at Hacettepe University, who will be joined by researchers, each more important than the others. First of all, I would like to briefly introduce our session speakers too. Professor Zsolt Dimitrovics, sorry if I pronounce wrong, joining from Gibraltar, is the chair of the Center of Excellence in Responsible Gaming, president of the International Society for the Study of Behavioral Addiction, and editor-in-chief of the Journal of Behavioral Addictions. Today, he is here to discuss his presentation titled Gaming and Attention Deficit Hyperactivity Disorder, ADHD, results from two large-scale studies. Professor Yankı Yazgan, joining us from Turkey, is a child psychiatrist at the Güzel Günler Clinic for Pediatrics and Psychiatry Clinic. Today, he is here to discuss his presentation titled Autism Spectrum Disorder, ACD, and Gaming and Other Digitally Pleasurable Activities. And Associate Professor Daria Kus, joining us from the United Kingdom, works at the Nottingham Trent University. Today, she is here to discuss her presentation titled Always On, Social Networking is a Way of Being. At the end of session, the speakers have been reserved 5 minutes each, during which they answer questions from the audience. I now leave the floor to Mr. Vedat Işıkhan. The floor is yours, kıymetli hocam.
Cansu Hanım, çok teşekkür ederim.
Biz teşekkür ederiz.
Thank you very much for the kind introduction. Yes, the floor is yours. Thank you very much. You're very kind. I would like to welcome you all to the 5th International Technology Addiction Congress organized by Turkish Green Crescent Society, and I would like to extend my gratitude and greetings to all the participants from across the world. The Green Crescent Society has succeeded something very difficult again, because we have been able to organize such a very comprehensive congress given the circumstances of COVID-19 pandemic. Therefore, I would like to extend my gratitude to President Professor Dr. Mücahit Öztürk and the organizing committee. This congress, organized by Turkish Green Crescent Society, has a very significant place in fighting against technology addiction. This congress is being held digital due to COVID-19, and in this congress, various subjects such as online gambling, internet and social media addiction are being discussed in the light of the most recent studies from across the world, and evidence-based and data-based research are being discussed in this Congress. This one, I believe, will raise awareness globally, and I wish you all a fruitful Congress. Drug abuse, tobacco use, alcohol, drinking is increasing at a greater rate than ever, and the age to start such addictions is getting low and low, and as a result, very significant problems do arise. Technology addiction is considered as a behavioral addiction, and it is, again, a very, very big problem. The technology addictions are based on human-machine interaction, and it might be television watching or online gaming for long hours, and internet addiction, digital gaming addiction, social media, gambling, smartphone will be more comprehensive and more problematic in the future. I believe we will be discussing them more often in our daily life. World Health Organization, for example, has considered online gaming as a mental health problem and called it gaming disorder. If you allow me, I would like to start this session. We have very distinguished guests. I don't want to take their time, and I would like to initiate the session in accordance with the session. The first speaker is Zsolt Dimitrovic, and he will be presenting to us his presentation about gaming and ADHD. You will have 20 to 25 minutes of presentation, distinguished professors, and at the end of the session we will have a Q&A part, and we will be having a chance to answer the questions from our distinguished participants. Now I would like to give the floor to Professor Dimitrovic for this session.
Thank you very much for the invitation and for this nice introduction. And I'm trying to share my screen. I think I succeeded. Yep. Is it visible? I hope. So thank you very much for the possibility. And indeed, I'd like to talk in the next 20 minutes about the relationship between gaming, video game use, and attention deficit and hyperactivity disorder based on two empirical studies, and I would like to shed some light on this relationship in the view of these studies. I think I fully agree with the introduction that the technological addictions, and among them gaming disorder or video game use, problematic video game use, is one of the very important topics or phenomenon we have to focus on and examine. Video game use is especially important because it may be one of the, for sure it's one of the most popular recreational activities. Many adults, but especially many of those in the younger generations do play video games at some level. That varies, however, very much. So some are just playing a little bit of time, while others more. And there's a minority of players who also shows symptoms of gaming disorder or experience addiction-like symptoms. And it was mentioned in the introduction, gaming disorder was also included in the ICD-11 in 2019, and also we have to emphasize that in the case of those who really show symptoms of gaming disorder, and again, as a recreational activity, we have to really emphasize the difference between gaming as a recreational activity and gaming at a level of when it brings problems to the individual and or his or her environment. So gaming disorder or problematic gaming has to be distinguished from just gaming as a recreational activity. But what we see that when we talk about problematic gaming, then we often find comorbid problems related to gaming. And one of them, however, it's not very extensively studied, is attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, ADHD, as it's often referred to. Majority of the former studies come from convenience samples, and that was also one reason why we thought that it would be important to look at the relationship also at non-convenient or representative samples. And I will base my data on two studies, which I will introduce shortly. And one of them is a representative sample of pre-adolescents from Budapest, Hungary, and the other one is indeed a convenience sample highly engaged gamers. So the first aim of our study or analysis is to examine the association between gaming disorder and ADHD in these two samples. However, our further aims is to explore the motivational differences between ADHD and non-ADHD video game players. We found in many other studies that gaming, that motives play a very important role in the background of gaming, both recreational gaming and disordered gaming. And we thought that that's why it would be important to understand the possible link between gaming motives, ADHD, and gaming, with a special focus maybe on escapism, as escapism and is one of the motives which had been brought into strong relationship with gaming problems in the past studies, and especially escapism seemed to be one of the motives which might be a link between psychiatric problems or psychological symptoms and gaming and the severity of gaming problems. So former studies showed that with regards to other comorbid symptoms or comorbid disorders, escapism or coping, also related motive, might mediate between psychological problems and the severity of gaming problems. So it could be, we thought that it could be also interesting to examine this possible relationship in the case of ADHD as well. And also we aimed to explore the association of ADHD symptoms and gaming disorder symptoms in the above discussed relationship, if we control for gender, family, and other possible relevant predictors. So the two studies I mentioned is the first one is the so-called Budapest longitudinal study on addictive behaviors, which study focuses on protective and risk factors in the addictive process and aims to examine a population of 5th grade students in Budapest. It's a longitudinal study, but in the current analysis, I will present data based on the first wave of the data collection. That's over 2,000 students, and the data collection happened in 2018 and 19. And it's a representative sample of the Budapest student of this age, and representative according to school type and district and the maintainer of the school, and data was collected with paper and pencil method, and almost 50% boys and girls were in the sample. Mean age is 11 years and small standard deviation due to the sampling. The second sample or the second study is a large sample of from the subscribers of popular Hungarian, or actually the most popular Hungarian gaming magazine. So they collaborated with us in terms of advertising or study. So we could collect data from almost 15,000 gamers in the spring of 2020. And that was an online data collection. As a gamer population, it's not surprising that in this sample we had much more boys or males than girls. That means close to 90% males. And the mean age is 24 years in this sample, however, a much higher standard deviation with 7 years. Obviously, that's a wide age range from 14 to 75 years old gamers. Just about the data or the variables we have. So we collected social demographic information, gaming characteristics, and in the first study we had questions on escapism motive, but we couldn't assess all different motives, so we were focusing on escapism. Obviously, we assessed gaming disorder, ADHD symptoms with the strengths and difficulties questionnaires. We used 3 items, which meant that we could not group or sample according to a cutoff. So we could measure the severity of ADHD symptoms, but we could not identify ADHD and non-ADHD groups. Self-esteem, depression symptoms, and some family-related variables as well. And in the second study, besides social demographic information and gaming habits, we used a partly newly developed questionnaire which assessed different gaming methods, gaming motives, including mastery, which includes the fields of exploration and mechanics, competition, advancement, and game skills. So it's kind of mastering in gaming. Immersion, escape motive, which includes escapism and coping. So that's the factor I mentioned in the introduction as well. Competition, I think it's clear what it is about. Stimulation is a factor or a motive that has strong loadings on arousal and action and distraction. So that's kind of gaming in order to stimulate myself. Social motive is quite clear, I think, what it covers, and habit and boredom, it loads on amotivation, and that means like gaming in order to avoid boredom. And we measured again gaming disorder, and we screened ADHD with 6-item adult ADHD self-report scale, which enabled also grouping for us. So just some basic data from the results. So the gaming disorder prevalence in the first study, that was 1.3%, and it was a little bit higher among boys, 2% compared to 0.7% among girls. ADHD symptoms average did not differ according to the gender, and you can see also the self-reported escapism score, which is significantly higher among boys, which is a little bit surprising, as in former studies usually girls scored higher in escapism. However, most of those studies used gamer samples and not a normal population sample as this analysis. And that's the model that we examined. So we looked at how escapism mediates the ADHD, between ADHD symptoms and either gaming disorder symptoms or gaming time. And what you can see here, that's the betas, and you can see also with the boys and the girls betas separately. So what we can see that there is a direct effect of ADHD symptoms on gaming disorder symptoms. So that means that those having more ADHD symptoms had a higher chance to produce or to show gaming disorder symptoms as well, while this was not true for the link between ADHD and gaming time. It's not surprising. In many studies, we have showed, and other studies showed as well, that gaming time is not a very good predictor of gaming disorder. You also see that there's not a very strong correlation between the two. But we saw also that there is a significant indirect path via escapism. So those who had more ADHD symptoms, they do game because of escapism motive with a higher chance, and they also have a higher chance to produce gaming disorders symptoms. So this, and what is important here also, that to see that this indirect path via escapism that stands for both boys and girls, while the direct path between ADHD and gaming disorder, it's only significant for the boys and not for the girls. It's just the same, actually just the data behind the figure I have showed, and also shows that that when we look at gaming disorder symptom severity, and I think that's much more important than the gaming time issue, then we see that in the case of boys, 40% of the variation is explained, much less in the case of girls. And also what we can see that I have mentioned, that the total direct effect is non-significant in the case of girls, while it is in the case of boys. I said that it is interesting, or it could be interesting, to look at the other variables also and their relationship to ADHD symptoms. So this linear regression model, what we can see that if it's a stepwise method. So if we enter family related variables to explain gaming disorder symptoms, then we see that there is a significant, though quite low effect. But in case we also enter weekly game time, that increases the model's explanation significantly, and again can be slightly increased with self-esteem, and again it can be increased with the involvement of ADHD symptoms, and further with depression symptoms and escapism. And in the final model, when all these variables are included, it's 44% of the variation is explained. If we go further to study 2, that is the gamer sample, as I mentioned, we could distinguish 2 groups according to the ADHD questionnaire and non-ADHD group. And what you can see here in disorder test is significantly higher. So those who have those who belong to the ADHD group, they showed much higher or significantly higher scores on the gaming disorder scale, and also the power of this difference is relatively high, moderate to high. Also, it was our aim to look at the motivational differences as we discussed in the introduction, and what we could say that we could find some significant difference in all motives that examined in the study. However, that also due to the big sample, so it's really worth to look at the Cohen-Dees. And if we do that, then we see that the strongest difference can be found, so moderate power difference can be found in the case of escapism or the immersion escapism factor and in the motivation factor. So we see that indeed those who game rather for escapism reason or a motivation reason, so in order to avoid boredom, they are more probably belong to the ADHD group than the non-ADHD group. It's the same as just with figures. And as I said, the largest difference was found in the case of immersion and motivation scales were smaller but significant in the case of competition and the stimulation factors. So just a few words, a few statements to sum up our findings, and also a little bit comparing to former studies. The prevalence estimates mainly in line with the earlier literature or lower than that, and also the gender differences are not surprising. As I mentioned, the higher scores of boys on the escapism factor is a little bit surprising in case of our first sample, but that might be explained that's a normal population sample, so that means that it's not a gamer population. All the results show that, as we expected, and also as former studies showed, even though not in such big samples and neither representative samples, that ADHD might cause some risks. So having ADHD symptoms might contribute to the risk of developing gaming disorder, and we could also confirm our expectation that escapism is a mediating factor between ADHD symptom and gaming disorder symptoms. However, there is also a direct path between the two in case of boys, but not in the case of girls. That difference requires for further explanation also, and calls for further studies. Former studies also, I mean, if we want to explain these results, then we know that further studies already mentioned that maybe that those having both gaming disorder and ADHD, they might have lower satisfaction with their family relationships, social skill. They show social skill deficits and lack of external stimulation. That's quite much in line with our findings, as well as we know that impulsivity, which is a major characteristic of ADHD, might contribute also to gaming. We also have to emphasize that ADHD symptoms such as impulsivity and restlessness is possible to trigger or just to increase the probability of gaming, but we also have to consider the possibility of the explanation that gaming could have a function in reducing or compensating for attention problems. So that's also possible that for those young people having ADHD and thus they having attention problems, if they get involved into gaming and they could immerse in gaming, that might serve as a way of coping with these symptoms when concentrating on games. I think that's maybe the scoping function is one of the interesting possible explanations on which we should focus on in further research. Obviously, there are some limitations of our study, as the self-report screening measures and the cross-sectional design. However, in the long run, we will have the chance to, in the case of the Budapest longitudinal study, we will have the chance to assess these questions or examine these questions in a longitudinal design as well. And as I said, that future studies should really focus on the role of motives, and as we see, especially on escapism as a possible mediator factor between ADHD and gaming disorder. So thank you very much for your attention, and thanks again once more for being here at this fantastic conference and being part of it. So really appreciate the invitation. Thanks very much for your attention. Thank you.
Can you unmute yourself, please? Dr. Vedat, can you unmute yourself, please? You are muted. Dr. Vedat Işıkhan. Now you are unmuted. Okay, please have the floor. Sorry, and thank you for warning. I muted it not to interfere with the speaker. We would like to extend our thanks to Professor Demetrovic. Thank you very much for this informing presentation. This type of study, the quantitative studies for developing macro level policy making, it constitutes an important scientific basis and evidence. Therefore, the number of this type of studies and researchers should be increased so that both for our country and for policymakers in other parts of the world, it's a very important scientific data. Professor Demetrovic, thank you very much for this study and sharing it with us. Now, if you may allow me, I will kindly invite Professor Yankı Yazgan, the second speaker of our session, Autism Spectrum Disorder and Digital Games, Digital Game Disorders. Please, Professor Yankı Yazgan, Autism Spectrum Disorder, Addiction and Gaming, the title of the presentation. Thank you very much. I will make my presentation in English as the working language is speaking.
But I'm more of an expert in neurodevelopmental disorders, including ADHD, Tourette syndrome, and ASD, autism spectrum disorder. And I was impressed by Dr. Demetrovic's presentation that really put emphasis on the emotional aspects of gaming, problematic gaming behavior, focusing on escapism and lack of motivation. In that sense, I think it will be quite important to discuss ASD as related to gaming and addiction in this brief presentation. I'm sorry that I'm not able to present my own data beyond my clinical expertise, but I'll be discussing a few recent articles that focused on the presence and the presentation of gaming problems, gaming disorder in individuals with autism spectrum disorder. But for the sake of the part of the audience who are not familiar with autism, I'll just very briefly repeat some of the DSM criteria just to remind what we are talking about. First of all, autism spectrum disorder is a neurodevelopmental condition, which means there is an early onset, and since it's intertwined with the development of brain and associated or correlating behavioral, emotional, social, and cognitive competences, it has a widespread effect on an individual's life across his or her lifespan. In terms of the symptomatic criteria for a diagnosis, there are two requirements. One is the presence of persistent deficits in social communication and social interaction across multiple contexts. And that's mainly associated with lack of or limited social motivation. And the motivation is mainly in the physical aspects of the world rather than the social. So that will be important while discussing the relationship with gaming disorder. And the second criteria, it includes the restricted repetitive patterns of behavior, interests, or activities. It's mainly abbreviated as RRBI. So I may use that term too. But there are like 4 criteria here. I will just highlight the 2. One is, in addition to stereotypies as the first, insistence on sameness, inflexible adherence to routines, or ritualized patterns of verbal or nonverbal behavior. So I think that's mostly observed in algorithmic behavior or over-systemized thinking of the ASD individuals that make them quite engaged in digitally based activities. And the other important criteria is like the highly restricted, fixated interests that are abnormal in intensity or focus, such as like preoccupation with unusual objects or kind of perseverative interests. So that might be also part of these individuals who get immersed, as Dr. Demetrovich mentioned, in the gaming world, and that may help them escape from a world which they don't feel that they are part of, or they don't feel that they are interested in becoming part of. So depending on the severity of ASD, these might be the kind of links that bring together ASD and gaming. You know, technology in general has been part of our lives, as is right now, and it has brought several advantages to individuals with ASD. And many of these ASD individuals are highly tech savvy and they enjoy computer-based instruction. And there are many high functioning ASD individuals in technology sector in business. However, I think in some ways the symptoms of ASD are related with technology use. So there are a few suggestions which I can make. One is obsessive repetitive behavior as part of the criterion B of ASD. For example, in many technological activities, there's a tendency to perform repetitive behaviors, like repeatedly playing the same game, loading the same image or page, or like performing a computerized task over and over. And it may also provide some sensory input, which if the child obtains it in a repetitive mode, I mean, it may help the child deal with the daily stress, and they can also they feel very comfortable with the immediate feedback that is provided by the digital the environment. However, I mean, it's also likely that that relief that comes with the repetition might serve as a basis for addiction to certain games or images or certain internet activities. So another symptom is symptom dimension of ASD, autism spectrum disorder, is the difficulty engaging with people, because social engagement is really a big challenge, even for individuals with much less severe symptomatology and higher intellectual functioning. So technology has allowed for social interaction that have been stressful for the child and the individual. However, these connections, the risks with digital life is not limited to gaming, but also there are many instances of cyberbullying or abuse. So when we speak of neurodevelopmental disorders and children and adolescents in particular, or adults with disabilities, there's always the great need to be overcautious at sometimes that require safety measures needing to be in place. So there are a few very interesting papers. One of them is from one of the lead authors is my here co-speaker, Dr. Demetrovich, which I enjoyed reading the material and I will share it with you. I think it's very important to remember that sometimes clinical concepts that are between diagnostic conditions and undiagnosable situations, these subthreshold cases. So problematic internet use serves that purpose, just to remind, like the lack of control concerning the amount of time spent engaging with the internet, or the preoccupation with the internet, the incessant need for more time, and withdrawal symptoms when not using the internet, or when the parents coerce the child to move away from the internet, the kind of acting out or the rage attacks, and social and professional domains due to the excessive internet use are affected by the overuse of internet or the inappropriate use of the internet. So we call this like problematic internet use. And the aim of the study was the association to investigate the association between ASD-like traits and problematic internet use and gaming disorder. So here, I think autistic-like traits will be, is also like the IUP, the PIU, or whatever you would say, the subclinical, subthreshold, but not necessarily unimportant. So this is like, there are like a few studies included in the analysis. So I'll just skip them for the sake of brevity. But I think it's important to see that the problematic internet use was quite common in clinical samples of individuals with ASD, and individuals with ASD had much higher rates of PIU. And not only that, but also there was a relationship between autistic-like traits and problematic use of the internet. So that shows something that probably some of my colleagues who are in the field will notice that, for example, many ADHD kids, especially in correlation with their severity of ADHD, or depending on the presence of a comorbid, for example, developmental coordination disorder or some sort of learning disability, they may display autistic-like symptoms, which may not qualify for a full diagnosis. But however, that used to be labeled as PDD-NOS in DSM-4. However, these individuals, although they do not meet the full criteria for ASD, they may be at risk for many functional impairments, including the problematic internet use. So that's, I think, a very important finding guiding the clinical practice. So I think the gaming disorder, if I may remind the criterion, like impaired control over gaming, the continuation or escalation of gaming, regardless of the negative consequences of an individual's personal life, gaming taking precedence over other hobbies and interests. So kind of a withdrawal. So in addition to the internet use, the ASD and gaming disorder was modestly associated, but significantly. And that's no surprise, but I think it's always good to document the relationship. And ASD and the presence of ADHD, especially even in individuals without a full diagnosis of ASD, I mean, these are really two major neurodevelopmental conditions, because they both share some common mechanisms like impulse control, response inhibition deficits, like the inability to stop the prepotent response, especially in circumstances that require delays of gratification. And when they are both together, especially these problems can individually or together lead to addictive gaming. So that's an important paper, and just guiding the clinical practice and very much consistent with what we have all observed. That's another interesting study from Japan, which was published in PLOS 1, and Kuriki and fellows, they have done a functional connectivity, brain connectivity study, which provide us some insights about what's happening. So I will not repeat the gaming disorder criteria from the study, but so here there was the focus was like, it wasn't only a study of ASD, but also looking at whether when ASD was accompanied by a comorbid condition such as ADHD, how did things change, especially in terms of the connection, association between ADHD, ASD, and gaming disorder. So this is like a kind of a medium scale study, but still has important findings, preliminary findings that guide us for further work. So, excuse me. So the functional connectivity means looking for certain neural networks in the brain subserving particular functions. So it's not like we know that the brain doesn't work, brain regions don't work in isolation, but they work in correlation with close relationship with other regions synchronously or sequentially, generating particular functions. I'm sorry about that. So when we look at the findings, the gaming disorder by itself, people with gaming disorder, they already had some diminished connectivities between particular brain regions. For example, and these connectivities were mostly in the reward system area and the executive control system area. So, but there wasn't a major alteration in the organization of the system. So it was the same system, but not working that efficiently. These were individuals with only gaming problems. So, but when they had a comorbid situation of ASD or ADHD, so there were alterations in the hub nodes. That means I'll just show you how these are imaged. But so that included, sorry, so just come. But by nodes, we mean, you know, like the brain, and you think of these connections where most of the interaction takes place. And this is the front, this is the rear, and right and left. And you see most of the areas. This is like if you compare the gaming disorder people to normal controls, there are changes in intensity, but the regions for executive control and reward processing are preserved. However, if you compare the gaming disorder individuals with gaming disorder individuals plus ASD, there is a substantial change in the areas that are involved in these networks. And this is mainly in the temporal and parietal areas, and some of the frontal functions shift towards these areas. That also is somewhat in line with the clinical observations. So, and what we call, you know, the executive control network and the reward systems that are affected in almost all of these neurodevelopmental conditions. But here, the gaming disorder, while gaming disorder diminishes that mechanism, the comorbid ASD tends to extend that into other areas involving recruiting some areas that are not essentially related with these functions. You know, which areas you would say? I would say like the basal ganglia, the amygdala, and the hippocampus. They all become part of that system. And this is not only limited to this. The reported pattern of altered activation is not only limited to the executive control network, but also to the reward system that involves the mesocortical circuits, which have already been reported for all sorts of behavioral addiction. So there is one more article that gives us an idea about the role of ASD and addictive behavior. You know, this is from somewhat older, from 2017 or 18, I'm sorry, coming from France. So that's, you know, the opioid receptors and the actually opioid peptides have been associated with the social, so my last 3 minutes, social behaviors. And actually there are many reports, you may be already familiar with reports of problems in social attachment and drug addiction, and opioid receptors and opioid peptides have been associated with attachment behavior. So the mu receptors, which we are talking about here, they are primarily, they are held responsible for the prosocial effect of the opioids. And it's not only for providing some relief, you know, like under social distress conditions, but also even in more neutral or even positive social situations, like seeking for social comfort, like a child seeking for her mother's lap or father's lap. So mu receptors are differentially active in that relationship. So there has been this is the study about like genetic knockout of the mu receptors and as proposed as ASD behavior. And it was obvious that, I mean, it was observed that the knockout gene for the mu receptors that are responsible for social behavior, they also showed stereotyped and perseverative behaviors, which are part of the ASD criteria, and which probably were also associated with some kind of the mice's the inability to find social reward or motivation. So it wasn't that the ASD mouse model also gave us an idea about how addictive behavior can be explored in mice by the knockout of the opiate receptors. I should probably make a note that in the past, use of agents like naltrexone has been also tried in autistic population for improving social attachment. So there is a kind of clinical, and here, as you see, the pharmacological link. And this study shows some, in short, evidence for some blunted reward processes in ASD, and especially that's the case for non-social, while non-social reward processes are not affected, because in ASD, non-social stimuli are processed well, but the social rewards and then the rewards with social motivational value were not processed well by mice lacking mu receptors. So the opioid tone and ASD probably are associated, and the opioid tone has already been linked with addictive behavior. So I think the ASD individuals might be more susceptible to addictive behavior, including gaming disorder or problematic internet use. In conclusion, let me summarize what I talked about. ASD individuals are susceptible for developing a gaming disorder, and with less clinical individuals with less clinical presentations of ASD are also at higher risk for PIU, problematic internet use, that may lead to gaming disorder. And neural substrates for gaming disorder in ASD is probably seated in the same areas with other kind of addictive behavior, but you see when they contrast them with gaming disorder individuals without comorbidities, in ASD we find more profound organizational neural alterations that also reflect or associated with more serious ASD. So thus, families of individuals, I think especially, should be informed about such information, and they should be aware of the greater risks for their children that come with, especially the unlimited use of internet and technology and gaming. And I think those risks need to be addressed firmly and intensively for preventing further damage. So I would like to take the opportunity to thank again to Yeşilay and its leadership and the scientific committee. We will be able to discuss at the end of the session, but if you want to send an email, here is my email, or you can visit my website for a Turkish summary of this presentation.
Çok teşekkür ederiz Professor Dr. Yankı Yazgan.
Professor Dr. Yankı Yazgan, I'd like to thank you very much.
Bu zamanda verimli kullandınız.
I also would like to thank you for making efficient use of time.
Özellikle dijital oyunların beyin fonksiyonları üzerindeki
You talked about the impact of digital games on brain extensively.
ile birlikte en son tartışma bölümünde aslında dijital oyunların
We're going to talk about
etkisinin aileler tarafından
the
bilinmesi,
impact of digital games and whether families are aware of this fact.
bu bilgileri bizimle paylaştı. Kıymetli hocama teşekkür etmek
We
istedim.
would like to thank Professor Yazgan very much.
Üçüncü konuşmacımız, panelistimiz olan
Now I'd like to invite our third speaker,
sözü vermek isterim.
Madam Daria Kus.
Daria Kus bizlere daima çevrim içi
She is going to talk about always online, social
ağ kurma adlı
networking as a way of existing.
sözü Daria Kus'a
You may have the floor, madam.
teşekkür ederim.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much for having me. Thank you also very much to the previous speakers for their very engaging talks. It's always very interesting to hear about the new research in the field. Now, today I would like to slightly change the focus from gaming onto social networking. So what I would like to talk to you about is being always on, social networking as a way of being. Now, I've been researching technology use for the past 15 years or so, focusing on gaming. I've spent a lot of time researching gaming, but I've also looked into other forms of technology use, including social media and social networking sites. And this is something that I'd like to discuss with you today, especially focusing on the ways in which we all use technology on an everyday basis. And I'm sure a lot of the things that I'm covering today will be things that you all are very much familiar with. Now, after 44 years, this prisoner here has been released from prison. He spent 44 years in prison for attempted murder. Now, when he actually was released from prison, what he found were streets like this in New York City. He found that actually the world around him had changed considerably. People were walking the streets with headphones dangling from their ears, and he was literally reminded of CIA agents. He didn't really understand how is it possible that people completely and entirely forget about their surroundings when they are crossing the street, completely immersed in their personal bubbles, looking at what is happening on their screens. And I'm sure that wherever you're walking around, if it's Istanbul, if it's Nottingham, any kind of place in the world nowadays, which you will find is people being completely engrossed in their own personal bubbles, not paying attention to what is happening around themselves, and really just dealing with whatever they find on their own screen. I've always been fascinated by that. As I say, I've been researching technology use for a long period of time now. And of course, I'm a very avid technology user myself, as I'm sure many of you. Let's just think about it. Without technology, we wouldn't be able to be here today, really at this Congress where we're able to connect with each other, no matter where we are, via technology. And this is the picture. This is the kind of situation that we're all faced with on a daily basis. Technology being present wherever we are, whenever we are. Even if we don't necessarily want to connect, the smartphones in our pockets allow us to connect anytime, anywhere. They're able to really give us the opportunities that without the technology, we wouldn't be able to have, especially in the present day and age where COVID, the pandemic, has unfortunately very negatively and detrimentally impacted on our lives. Thinking about social restrictions that are present all around the world due to national lockdowns, really allowing us to connect anytime, anywhere. Now, when thinking about technology use, I'm thinking about social networking. Why do we use social networking sites? What do we use them for? What kind of a part of our lives have they become? And I will be giving you a couple of examples from my own life, just to visualize. Probably you can see yourself in those examples. Now here you've got a picture of my friend Anna. We went to a Da Vinci exhibition in London before the whole lockdowns happened. And as you can see, Anna, she was really very much drawn into the drawings by Da Vinci, but at the same time, she was pretty much engrossed in her own personal bubble on her social networking sites, really, as you can see her here, looking at a smartphone, engaged in a conversation with one of the friends that wasn't actually able to come on the day to join us for the exhibition. So what she did was to share her experience, share her life experience whilst being at the exhibition with the other people who, on the other hand, were able to engage in the experience without being physically present. So really, this is, an enlarging of the experience. This is allowing other people to partake in the experience, and it's almost like creating an audience for your own experience by means of using social networking sites. Another example here of myself, again, a couple of years ago. This is a picture of me taking a picture of Johnston Canyon in the Rocky Mountains in Canada. And really, this is how we often engage with our physical world around us, through a screen, making sure that we can capture the moments so we've got the memories. So what is it about those memories? What is it about having to capture the experiences? When I think about it, I think the main aim for most of us when we're doing things like this is really to authenticate the experience. The participants in my research, and I've asked people about this many times, often they say to me that actually by means of capturing the experience, by means of sharing the experience, I can authenticate the experience. I can make the experience real. I can share it. And this is how the experience actually exists. So if I was there and I haven't captured the experience, perhaps the experience wasn't as real as social networking sites make the experience. Another example from my own life. So you will know, and I'm sure most of you will, that your smartphones have a digital well-being app. So my Android phone has an app that's called a digital well-being app. The iPhone users, I'm sure, have a similar alternative. And this app allows you to check your own smartphone usage on a daily basis or on a weekly basis. And as you know, a lot of our smartphone usage is intimately intertwined with our use of social networking sites. Now, here's an example of my own use one of the other days here. It was 12:44, so just after midday. And by that time, I had spent about 1.5 hours using my smartphone. I spent about half an hour on Facebook, another half an hour on WhatsApp, another half an hour almost on my gallery, with some time spent probably doing my emails. That is quite a bit of time when you think about it, 1.5 hours by about midday. I wonder, is your usage similar? I wonder, would you be spending as much time as I have spent? Now, in addition to the usage time, what you can also see is that I've unlocked my phone 20 times by that time. Seems quite a lot of times, doesn't it? But when we look at the research on this topic, what we find is that the average person will be unlocking their phone about 80 to 90 times a day. It seems like we are very much glued to our phones. Speaking of which, oh, there's mine, but I switched it off today just to make sure that I can give you all my attention for this session. In addition to this, I've received 92 notifications just by midday. Now, with those notifications popping up, I'm sure you've realized this on your own phones. With or without a sound, you will be immediately drawn to those notifications. Your phone will capture your attention immediately. And that's one of the reasons for why I've always encouraged people to try and switch off their notifications so you can get on with the task at hand. In fact, we've done research on smartphone notifications with my colleagues over in computer science, checking how your mood is impacted by the notifications that you receive on your phone. And interestingly, there is a direct impact on how you feel by means of the kind of notifications that you receive. And you will be pleased to hear that the social media or generally social notifications that people receive on their phones are mostly experienced as being very positive. So they may indeed elevate your mood. They may make you feel better. Just a few ways here to show you how we're using social networking sites and what an integral element to our lives they have become. Because we spend so much time using social networking, and because we almost have the inherent need to authenticate our experiences by capturing them and by sharing them, you can really see that social networking has become a way of being. It is a way that we are indeed able to relate to one another, changing the ways in which we live our lives in very considerable ways. This can be linked to what I call the always on lifestyle. So thinking about being online all the time. And my colleague, Dana Boyd, who is a researcher at Microsoft Research and is leading the data science team there, she has been studying this, technology use, especially also in adolescence, for a very long period of time. And she captures very eloquently what it means to lead this always on lifestyle. So what she says is the following: it's no longer about being on or off, really. It's about living in a world where being networked to people and information wherever and whenever you need it is just simply assumed. So we assume of each other that we are online all the time. It means two things. First, being online, being networked is indeed the status quo. This is how we are leading our lives, okay? This is why when I'm traveling to conferences around the world, no matter where I am, my colleagues and my students will know that I've got my phone on me, I've got my laptop on me, and I will be reachable, irrespective of my actual geographical location. Okay, this is what we're referring to as space-time compression, where it doesn't matter where you are, geographically speaking. It doesn't matter what time it is. There is this constant and perpetuous connectivity that allows us to communicate across borders, irrespective of space and time boundaries. Again, this is the opportunity for us to be together here online, irrespective of the countries that we're coming from, being together in this virtual space, in this international conference on technological addictions. The second point that this really implies, that this quote really implies, is the fact that it's quite difficult really to get away from it. This kind of connectivity almost leads to that need, that kind of pressure to be online all the time. And Dana Boyd herself refers to, when she wants to actually take a break from a technology, she refers to having to take a digital sabbatical, really, taking a holiday from using technology. But then, rather than switching off all her gadgets entirely, what she says is that she will be looking at those kinds of messages that she wants to respond to, and the other ones she will ignore until she's ready to get back to her regular online life, which obviously coincides with your offline life in so many ways, especially in the present day and age, where technology and this online connectivity has just become so much more relevant, so much more important in so many different ways. Now, I'll give you another example here. This example shows you how we are using technology and how social networking has become a way of being. This is a picture of my friends, Widit and Isabella, a couple of years ago at our annual Christmas dinner. What we tend to do is, on an annual basis, come together with a group of women for the festive period to share a nice meal together. And as you can see, these two, they are very good friends, sitting so closely together, so in the same physical space. But at the same time, you can see how much their attention is divided, is away from each other as conversation partners. So each of them is completely and entirely engrossed in their own gadget. They're both focusing on their own phones whilst sitting next to each other, whilst sitting in a group of another 10 people around them. Now, we scientists, we refer to this activity as phubbing. So snubbing somebody by means of being on your phone, really by engaging with your phone rather than the surroundings. And this is quite a common activity. Certainly when I go to restaurants here in Nottingham, I will find that people sitting together around the table are very often engaged in their own technology. And this holds across generations. It's younger people, but it's also older generations that engage in this kind of activity. And I wonder, why is it that people do this? Why is it that despite being in a social situation, you are actually taking that time to put yourself in that personal bubble, which is something that Sherry Turkle of MIT Research would really refer to as being alone together. So you are together, you are physically together, but really you are alone, focused on your own little gadget, focus on what is happening in your own social networking sites. So these girls might be tweeting about their current experience of sitting in a group of people, having a nice Christmas dinner, and posting pictures on Instagram to make sure that their social networks around them like their pictures. So this is the kind of experience that we have on an everyday basis. And I've talked to psychotherapists about this. So I've researched this and asked psychotherapists around the world about their experience talking to clients who present with the problem of problematic and excessive internet technology use. And they say to me that they fear the sort of relentlessness of ongoing messaging. So referring to their client's experience here. So it's relentless because you need to respond immediately at all times. One of the participants in my studies, and this was a young gentleman in his 20s, in his early 20s, he said to me that when he's at home, sitting on a sofa, he will have his phone, his smartphone in his hand. So this is, really taking the idea of technology being an extension of man, which Marshall McLuhan, a Canadian philosopher, has come up with in the 1960s. It's really taken that idea quite literally, where the phone becomes an extension of your physical body, of your arm, of your hand, an extension also of your mind, an extension in that way that you can communicate, you can connect, you can find information, you can organize your life, you can entertain yourself with music, games, chatting, whatever it is you like to do, you will find it in your phone. So this is a very, very interesting kind of phenomenon. But he also says, the psychotherapist from whom this quote comes, but concurrently with that is an absolute terror of exclusion. So one of the reasons, one of the very strong motivating factors, one of the very strong drivers for technology use, for social networking site use, is the fear of missing out. So he calls it the terror of exclusion. We call it the fear of missing out, of FOMO, that kind of fear that others are having very rewarding experiences from which you are absent. And therefore, you make sure you're present. Therefore, you make sure you are online, you are available, you're networked, you're connected, and you are interacting. You must interact because otherwise you may miss out. There's this fear of missing out. Again, a very strong motivating factor for people to use social networking sites, making social networking an even stronger way of being. Finally, what I'd like to talk to you about is, the kind of motivational factors that are behind social networking site use. So why are we motivated so much by social networking sites use? I think looking at it from the perspective of Maslow's hierarchy of needs is indeed a very good and very understandable way, very relatable way of thinking about human motivation or the human need to actually engage with social networking sites. As you may be aware, Abraham Maslow was a psychologist, American psychologist, who came up with a theory of human motivations. And he therefore created this pyramid of needs where on the bottom, you will find the more fundamental kinds of needs, such as physiological needs, food and water being some of them. So in order to sustain yourself, you need food, you need water, as well as sexual activity. In order to procreate, you will engage in sexual activity. So you've got the very fundamental level here. Moving on to the next layer in this hierarchy of needs, being security. So another very fundamental need is for us to feel safe, to feel secure in our homes, in our environments. Each of the bottom needs to be met before the higher level needs can be met as well. The next need is the need for human belongingness, so being able to belong to a social group. We are social animals, and as humans, we need to belong to a group. We need to be part of a group. And then we've got the need for esteem. We need to be accepted. We need to be recognized by our groups, the groups that we are part of. This is a very fundamental human need. And then finally, on the pinnacle of the pyramid, as you can see there, is self-actualization. So really making the best of your life and really fulfilling your goals, fulfilling your life, leading your life to the fullest of your capacity. Now, when we are thinking about social networking sites use, and this is just so fitting, and I'll show you why, you will see that social networks actually are able to meet every single one of those most fundamental human needs. And I will show you now. Now, in terms of physiological need, of course, an internet connection is not a physiological need, but it means that, it is a fundamental need, because without an internet connection, without Wi-Fi, we would not be able to use our technology now. We would not be able to connect to our social networking sites. We would not be able to use our smartphones, okay? In terms of security, social networkings really allow us to customize our privacy settings. We decide who we can follow. We decide who can become our friend, our follower on social networking sites. We can decide what kind of information about ourselves are we revealing on those websites to the public. in addition to this, and very crucially, and this is something that I'm sure you're very, very aware of, social networking sites, and I've mentioned that before, they really fulfill our need of belonging. They allow us to connect with other people, and mostly those will be people who share similar interests with us, and people who like the similar things that we like as well, our friends, our followers. We can make the decisions as to whom to follow, whom to befriend as well. And it really allows us to grow those online virtual communities, which are social networking site communities. In terms of esteem, social networking sites also allow us to show esteem, to create esteem, build esteem by means of gathering friends, gathering likes. So the more likes, the more friends I have on social networking sites, the better, the higher my esteem might be perceived to be, at least. And it allows us also to make comparisons. We may compare ourselves, our lifestyles, our physical appearance with that of the people that we're following. And we may make comparisons based on that. Upward comparisons as well as downward comparisons. We've researched this, and we've specifically found really that, you know, having following lots of people on Instagram may potentially lead to problems in the context of self-esteem and in the context of really general well-being and perhaps even depressive symptoms. So it can go both ways. It can have a beneficial effect, but potentially it may also have a negative effect on esteem. And then finally, in the idea of self-actualization, as I say, the pinnacle of Maslow's pyramid here, it has to do with the idea of being able to present yourself, self-presentation. And as you may be aware, generally what we tend to do when using social networking sites, when presenting ourselves, we will be presenting ourselves in the most idealized kind of way, right? You will see very few pictures on social networking sites of people who have just gone up after a long night out, for example, literally just fallen out of bed, or very few people will share sad experiences such as bereavements or divorces, for example. What you will want to share are the great things that you're experiencing, holidays that you're having, spending nice times with your family and friends, things like this. So self-presentation is one of the ways in which we can reach self-actualization using social networking sites. Another one is the support function that social networking sites have. So the support function in such a way that you're very easily able to connect with people who share not just similar interests, but who might find themselves in similar positions as well. Perhaps people who might have mental health problems, or perhaps people who might have physical health problems. And having that support from an online community in the form of a social networking site may be incredibly valuable for these people who otherwise may not find other people in similar situations in their immediate physical environment. But because of the space-time compression of the internet and the social networking sites that I've previously mentioned, it is very easy to find people in similar situations, even if those situations are very rare, even if those situations or these interests may be particularly niche interests. So I think this really goes to show that social networking sites allow us to live in a way that is completely different. They are a way of being. They are the status quo. They allow us to authenticate experiences. They allow us to fulfill most fundamental human needs that we have. And I think it's really important when we are discussing technology use, and also when we're discussing problematic and potentially addictive technology use, to understand the place that technology use has in our culture and in our everyday lives. And I hope that by talking about this, by touching upon this briefly, I was able to share some of those insights with you. Now, I think we have an opportunity to have some questions, and I'll be very happy to take your questions now. And of course, feel free to contact me, send me an email, follow me on Twitter, and I'll be happy to engage with you. Thank you very much for your interest.
Doçent Doktor Daria Kusa, güzel sunumu için teşekkür ederim.
I would like to thank Associate Professor Dr. Daria Kus for this great presentation.
Olarak sosyal ağ kurma konusundaki sunumunu gerçekleştirdiler. Gerçekten
we have listened to her presentation. It has been
hiyerarşisinin
very explanatory, and especially with her discussion on Maslow's pyramid of needs in today's version has been really great. Esteemed participants of the Congress, we would like to make the best use of the time, and if you allow me, I will be referring the questions to the panelists. The first question is to Professor Demetrovich. I will be reading it out in English.
Professor Demetrovich, a question is going to you. It is known that self-regulation and sensory processing can be affected in situations such as ADHD and autism. What do you think about the possibility? For example, sensory seeking, sensory avoidance, sensory sensitivity. Problem in game and internet, educate children, and the study of the sensory integration intervention on this issue. Do parental etudes on GD and ADHD differ by gender? Thank you for answer.
Yeah, thank you very much for the questions. And I think it's a very important issue to raise the possible role of sensory integration therapies or interventions. And I would emphasize here maybe two things. That one is that sensory integration therapy has an effectiveness which is limited to the age. So that's very important that we have to be conscious of, that you cannot extend its effectiveness to any age. But on the other hand, so I mean, we know that there's a strong relationship between, that sensory integration interventions are quite effective in the case of ADHD. So as we saw that there's a strong link between ADHD and gaming disorders. So in this regard, the application of such intervention, if that decreases the chance of the developing of ADHD or actually any developmental disorder, then for sure it decreases also the possibility of developing gaming disorder. But again, that means it's not that I'm emphasizing the age issue, because I think that it's a more general question. So it's more important to be aware of any developmental problems with our children, and if there's any, then it's important to see a professional and apply, for example, sensory integration therapy, because that would increase the development of any other problem behaviors, including, of course, gaming disorder as well. But yeah, the link is obvious, and I'm very happy that it was raised. And I'm sorry, what was the other question? Maybe the parental attitudes. I'm not really aware of such a specific study, but parental attitudes are different to boys and girls. So they are certainly different in case of gaming as well. I don't know, maybe Daria can add anything to it. But yeah, so for sure there are differences, and it needs to be different also, because the gaming behavior or the technology use behavior of boys and girls is also different. So and it's also, yeah, so it is. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Dimitrovich, for your answer. The other question is to Professor Yazgan. What is your approach on gaming disorder of children with ASD? What are your observations about clinical applications, Professor? And based on experiences, what is your social reward suggestions for parents of children with ASD and GD or ADHD, or GD? Thank you for your answer, Professor Yazgan. Please. Professor Yazgan, your voice is close, I think. Thank you.
Sorry, just thanks a lot. So thank you for the question. It's a great question. So it allows me to address some important aspects of how to handle the daily problems that are added on what is already present, actually. So one is, I'm not a prohibitionist person. So I'm not like, in a way, we need to, many of these kinds of behavior in children, regardless of their diagnostic status, is mostly the result of seeking some sort of relief or compensation. So it's like most of the kids' behavior is to balance or replace something that's already missing. And just perhaps a remark on the parental attitude. Most of the literature available shows that the internet use time is correlated with parents' availability. So if the parents are not available enough, then the use of internet exceeds some acceptable level. So it's so if the child in general has someone to connect with, maybe a friend, depending on the age, maybe a parent, or depending on, of course, if you are in a lockdown in your room, the situation is different. If you have the opportunity to go out and exercise, socialize with friends, get a beer or do something, etc., then it's another story. However, the issue is, I think that for ASD kids, social rewards are really not of high value. So that's because of the nature of the problem. And so I think the use of internet or any kind of technological device should be supervised. I mean, because these children have difficulty in inhibiting their responses. So that means their attention may be captivated easily by some kind of physical stimuli, especially repetitive physical stimuli, and that may lead to overuse of internet time that will take from already limited, precious social time. So that's what I advise parents of younger children. But as the kids grow up, things are different because, first of all, it's a social need to be connected with other people. And if the social media or other devices or playing on games and talking to your friends on Twitch is providing you some kind of a social background where you can exploit for many purposes, I think that's not something to fight against. But the thing is, as we saw in the research presented, not only the time, but the intensity, the kind of use of the games are important to follow. So that requires a lot of monitoring of the child's behavior. And monitoring is not like putting like a surveillance camera, but it's about spending time and seeing what the child is doing. So that's what parents need to do. That's my opinion, actually. So no social reward can compete with games. So that's something to keep in mind. I mean, we are not, so it's not like finding something better. So the kid it's like nothing can compete with fast food. Like, it's like, okay, if you put healthy food here and some nice hamburger with the worst material, so kids will not prefer healthy food. So it's like a kind of a matter of regulation, especially for younger children, and develop some healthy life habits. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Yazgan, for clear answer. The last question is going to Associated Professor Daria Kuz. question is that what do you think about self-objectivization with excessive use of social media by women and men? Thank you.
Thank you very much for this very interesting question. It is indeed a question that one of my PhD students is currently researching. Now, what she is looking at is Instagram use by young people and the impact Instagram use may have on body image satisfaction. And the question of self-objectification, of course, is a very integral one. I think this has direct relevance to the aspects that I've mentioned in my talk with regards to self-presentation on the one hand, but also in terms of comparisons with others. So self-presentation on social media tends to happen in an idealized format in such a way that you might objectify yourself by means of objectifying your face, your body, your lifestyle. And at the same time, you might objectify other people online, try to aspire to leading the kinds of lives that they are leading. And given that most people will be following other people on Instagram, for example, who may lead more luxurious lives, who may indeed be celebrities, it is always a comparison where the people who are using Instagram may indeed compare themselves less favorably, which may lead to problems with regards to self-esteem and also problems with regards to anxiety, general worry, and potentially also depressive symptoms, which is something that we have found online. So it is quite paradoxical because using social networking sites may increase your esteem, as I've showed you in my presentation. It may make you feel better about yourself and your surroundings, but at the same time, because of the social comparisons that are constantly ongoing, it may indeed also at the same time have the opposite effect. So what I would really recommend would be to have the knowledge, the awareness that whatever's presented on social networking sites doesn't necessarily have to present reality. Instead, it may be an idealized kind of version of reality that we may aspire to. And bearing this in mind is something that is going to significantly improve people's psychological and physical mental health and well-being. As we've seen in the context of body dysmorphic disorder, for example, there are a number of young women in psychotherapeutic treatment who, as a consequence of using Instagram and other social networking sites excessively, especially the visually focused ones, may develop problems with their body image, which will have detrimental impacts and which will require potentially extended periods of psychotherapy. And therefore, it is really important for us to start at the beginning, make sure that we raise awareness of what social networking sites really represent. And that, of course, not only goes with body ideals, but also in terms of the information, the kinds of news that are being presented on there, and having open conversations with young people about their use, ensuring that the use is indeed very conscious of potential pitfalls, but at the same time, not discouraging them from using it, because social networking sites are indeed social spaces that are part of our everyday lives.
Thank you, Associated Professor Daria Kuz. I would like to all panelists for contribution to our Congress. Bundan sonra ben Türkçe devam etmek istiyorum. Çok kısa.
I want to continue in Turkish.
Ben oturumu kapatmak isterim. Türkiye İşler
And I would like to adjourn this session with very short words.
Çok güzel sonuçlar olacak.
There will be again great results of this Congress, and hopefully we will have a chance to share the results with you as well. Considering my own area, I am also actively engaged in the Social Policies Board of Turkish Presidency, and in respect of the technology addiction, I believe the repercussions on the individuals, families, groups, and and the community will be used to support the policy making as well, I believe. And maybe in order to protect our children from the effects of the digital gaming disorders, maybe we should encourage them to participate in the forests, in the nature, to encourage them to take part in the social world more.
Son olarak tek yönlü bir yaklaşım elbette teknolojiyle ilgili
one way approach cannot really lessen the problems in this regard.
Kamu kurumları, sivil toplum
kuruluşları but we can say
bir araya gelebileceği, çocuklarımızı
the relevant NGOs can come together and
ivedilikle başlatılması
they could initiate such talks to protect the children and the families from the dangers posed by these disorders, and also
nedenleri önlenmesi ve geleceğe yönelik vizyonla ilgili çok güzel çalışmaları var.
The Turkish Grand National Assembly is also working on the reasons for the behavioral addictions. And once again, I would like to extend my gratitude to the organizing committee for organization of this event. And also I would like to extend my gratitude to the scholars who have shared their insights with us today. Thank you very much. Thank you, Professor, for this great moderation. And meanwhile, I would like to thank the participants.
It was so informative as always. Çok teşekkür ederim. Görüşmek üzere kıymetli hocam. Ben bu oturumu
Thank you very much. I am now adjourning this session and I would like to announce the next session. Thank you.
Tabii bu oturumumuzda bu panelde soru ve cevap bölümü panelin içerisinde.
The Q&A part was included within this session, and we have last session.
Our next session, which is our last session for today, and also see you at 5 p.m.